In addition to practicing your washes, it's a good idea to practice your brush stroke. So here I am using a small brush and exerting very little pressure. If I increase the pressure, I come up with a wider line. Likewise, if I have a much bigger brush, I can apply, make sure the amount of water is just right. I could apply not much pressure and have a thin line, and then as I increase the pressure, I have a thicker line. This is important because in watercolor you want to use as few brush strokes as possible. Light pressure, thin line. Heavier pressure, thicker line. So here I'm showing you a creature that I'm doing with just Payne's gray, which is a very dark gray similar to a black, over a variegated wash. It's a black cat, surprise. But the takeaway here is that I'm not doing an outline and then filling it in. I'm just using my brush to create a pleasing form. Before this dry, I'm going to pull out the whiskers with the back of my brush, which is just going to make a more impressionistic set of whiskers. And the ears. Starting with a graded wash for the sky, I'm just going to practice my brush work by increasing the pressure on the brush and then decreasing it. And I do it again. And then I add some brown here, and I am creating a very simple Tuscan landscape. I'm spreading out that brown onto the earth. I could even add a little hill in the background with another graded wash. Because watercolor is a transparent medium, we work from light to dark, and therefore one way of preserving a light color is to paint around it, and this is called negative painting, because you are painting the moon, for example, not by painting the moon, but by painting the sky and avoiding the moon. And that's how the shape of the moon is created. You can then, if you want, give it a little bit of color inside to give a sense of dimension. Negative painting can also be done in layers to create something a lot more complex than a full moon. So here I have drawn with a pencil the outline of a tree, and by creating a background with darker paint, the tree emerges. And then when that tree is dry, I can create another tree or several trees by doing the same process, where it's now the second layer that creates the second layer of paint that creates the outline of a tree. And I can keep going with that and create several layers of this magical forest. And then when I'm done with that, if I want, I can go and do some shadows. Remember this negatively painted moon? We can add to the painting by using our brush and some very loose brush strokes. And I'm using Payne's gray here, which is a bluish dark gray, almost black, to just let the brush dance on the paper. This is Chizen rough paper. It's very rough. And I can create a series of evergreens. Lifting is the removal of color from a watercolor painting, and it can be done more or less well depending on the paint you have used to begin with. Here I don't remember what black I used, but it's lifting a tiny bit. See how I used to have like a completely black and matte and even wash? I am now wetting the paper with my brush and then using my tissue to lift some of the color and give in the process some dimension to this black cat. See, so it's a little bit of changes that you can make after the paint has already dried. I'm making a night sky with a variegated wash on tough 300-pound Arches rough paper. Then quickly I put a Canadian coin, because it's bigger, in tissue, and I do this on the wet wash. And I have a moon. I've lifted the wet paint to give the impression of a moon, which I can then make more beautiful with the addition of a tiny bit of yellow and pink. Before you base an entire painting on lifting, you want to test whether the color lifts, because some colors, such as ultramarine, lift more easily than others, such as alizarin crimson. Natural earths usually lift more easily. This is Pompeii red. And Prussian usually doesn't lift so easily, but it's lifting. But see, with ultramarine you can get back to almost white, whereas with alizarin and Prussian you still get the stain of the color. That's why these are called staining colors, whereas a color like ultramarine is a sedimentary color. I made a variegated wash with the colors of the sea, let it dry, drew very simply the outline of a koi fish, and now I'm painting it over with just water only inside the outline, and then with a tissue I lift the paint and let it dry. Now that it's dry, you can play with some of the colors on the koi, and you have this beautiful transparent background on the fish, which is due to the fact that you lifted the color rather than just not have it to begin with. And then you can add an eye, and then if you want to get fancy, you can spatter some gold.